Everyone. I'm Adam Smolensky, and I lead the user experience research team. I'm looking forward to answering any of your questions about our team, the work we recently completed, and the projects we're currently working on now. So at this point, I'll ask the first person to verbalize their question. It looks like it's Valerie. She isn't present, so I will voice it for her. She's referring to slide 7. There was some navigation work done in the top nav. And she's asking, it looks like there was some research done in the top navigation. Are there plans for research in the left nav? I think that's what she's asking there. Absolutely, yes. It looks like Catherine, you already started to answer that, so I will let you talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, thank you, Adam. And yes, so the answer to that is we are currently doing a large initiative around navigation. So top navigation is one piece, and then left navigation is another large piece of it. And so where we're currently at is that we've conducted multiple tree testing studies to come up with a benchmark of the current experience of the left side navigation. And what we're doing from there is taking the insights that we're gathering from those studies and seeing where there are patterns. So where are common areas that users were confused or struggled, and seeing across the studies if there are some insights coming out of that. And so right now we're in the analysis and synthesis phase. And where we'll go from that is to also look at similar products in the space to get a sense of how users might expect our information to be organized based off of tools they also interact with, like GitHub or Jenkins or things that are in our space. And what we want to do is just take that and get a better picture of the mental models that our users have of GitLab so that we can come up with a structure for the content that more accurately aligns with that mental model. So if you want more information about that, please feel free to see the epic. That's where it's starting to be built out. And feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks, Catherine. And Jeff, I saw that you wrote a little note in there too.
I was just trying to capture what Catherine was saying.
Oh, okay, great. I added another note about the fact that we do have a standardized process when testing navigation, if anybody's interested in that, because it's a very unique way to test. So we find it interesting, so hopefully some of you might too. Sid, it looks like you have the next question.
Yeah, I noticed that push rules are now in the top level navigation. To me, that's something that's more of a setting than a top level thing. So I was wondering about the reasoning behind that. That's interesting.
So this is actually a great question that aligns with a lot of what we're trying to figure out now. So now navigation and settings are within the editor group. But we don't actually have visibility into all the decisions and changes being made to the navigation. So that's an area that I also don't know why it was added at the top level. And then also that's part of what we're digging into so that we can come to a uniform way of deciding what should be top level, what should go where, and when these decisions are being made, how to better get a grasp on those changes. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I also noticed that.
Cool. Yeah, I think our settings menu is getting pretty wild. It feels like you go to settings and then you have to kind of re-dig into what you want to do. It's now you have settings, and then you go to general, and then you go to there's a bunch of stuff at the bottom, and you click expand on those. To me, it feels, and I'm at item number 3 for the people taking notes. It feels like we have kind of 2 hierarchies instead of 1. So I would really love to see at least a test with let's move the settings under the relevant parts. And that way we can make the teams responsible for them again. in the end, most organizations end up shipping their org chart, for better or worse. I think our org chart is pretty well done, so let's ship that. But it feels now settings like is you're in CI, you're trying to do something, and it's like you have to guess, oh, is this part of CI maybe under settings, and you have to dive in again and trying to find the CI settings there. So that's a suggestion I'm excited about, but I wonder if there's any hot takes about that.
Yeah, that's something we plan to look into as well, because what we want to look into is basically the workflows. I'm sure there are workflows where you're in CI and you don't necessarily want to leave that context and you might want to stay there. But then there are other cases where it may not make as much sense to have those individual settings distributed with the individual feature, because you might be thinking, I need to go to one center where I can find general things. But that general thing is hidden somewhere else that I have no clue where to go if I'm an entirely new user. So that's just like a general sense that we want to look into. What are the workflows where it makes sense to have settings in context, and what are workflows where it might make sense to have a home or a global place for there to go. But that is somewhere that we want to look into as well in the editor group.
And Sid, for clarification, I think I saw a post of you walking through this idea, and I think you referred to it as moving away from the iOS settings model. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
I think the iPhone, which is a very user-friendly device, so that's interesting, but it does that, where it just kept piling all the settings under settings, and you're now using an app, you want to change the settings for that app, and you have to like leave the app, go to the general settings menu, go into the biggest settings menu of your life. I think it's a horrible user experience. And I think that's where we're heading as GitLab. And I think it makes more sense to have the settings within the app, or in our case, we're shipping 70 different products. It makes more sense to have the settings next to the product than in a totally different hierarchy you have to figure out. And I do agree there's some settings that are more on the general level that can be, for example, in the project overview or things like that. But having both would be the worst of both worlds. So not advocating for having, if we do this, we have to remove the top level settings thing and just nest them. But I'm not sure we should do it, because apparently Apple, with all the user research, came out that it's best to throw all the settings on a large heap. So they're no dummies either.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up these points. That's exactly why we want to research it, so that we can determine what is the best way to do this cohesively and not have some, because right now we currently have top level ones, and then we have some areas, like for example, I think secure and compliance, where there's the configuration section underneath. So we're already starting to have two approaches, and we want to get a handle on that. So thank you for bringing that up.
For sure.
I'll ask the next one, if that's okay. So it's more around slide 9, around SUS, or a system usability scale. The team did a lot of work around this, a lot of deep thinking, and Jeff was driving the majority of this along with Catherine. And I wanted to ask Jeff if you're able to just talk through some of the changes in the methodology around this. It might be useful to explain a little bit around what was done prior to the change and now after the change.
Yeah, totally. So we've been doing SUS now for quite a while. I think it's either we're at or approaching 2 years. Catherine has been doing a great job executing SUS and getting visibility into the results from SUS. As we as a business started putting more emphasis on SUS and trying to sort of do more with it, we kind of started to notice some issues in terms of the methodology and how sustainable it was going to be and how sort of reliable those results were going to be, given how we were fielding the survey. And so we sort of took a step back and said, okay, how can we do this in such a way where we can feel confident that the results are going to be valid, that we can do this sustainably every quarter and not exhaust our user populations. So a lot of this information is on the handbook page as well, but basically, previously we were using our first look user panel to field the SUS survey. That's approximately 3,000 people right now. I don't know the exact number. So you can see when we're trying to field a survey of 200 people a quarter, for instance, how we would very quickly start exhausting some of those populations, especially when you start thinking about some of this sort of smaller cohorts within the overall population, such as paid users or SaaS users, self-managed users. You're taking those 3,000 people and slicing them into smaller and smaller slices. So because there was a desire to be able to understand the scores for those particular cohorts of people, we wanted a method of sourcing people that we knew we wouldn't be exhausting that user base, and we could hit those people each quarter without worrying about any negative sentiment implications. And so we've transitioned from using First Look to actually looking up SaaS users in the data warehouse. This has a number of advantages beyond just the quantity. The other main advantage is the reliability of the data. So when someone signs up for First Look, they do give us a number of pieces of information about themselves and their usage. That data, unfortunately, rarely, if ever, is updated. So someone's usage or plan or other aspects of who they are may no longer be true, especially the longer they exist in the First Look panel. The nice thing about the warehouse is that data is always current. So we always know what plan someone is on. We always know their usage of the SaaS product. And we can leverage that when we're doing our recruiting and our targeting. And so we've now rolled out a pilot. We did a pilot this quarter, and we're going to be tracking a number of specific samples of people within the overall SUS score. So we will calculate an overall SUS score, but then within that, we will calculate a free user score, a paid user score, and then new users and mature users. And this is just nice because it will allow us to understand how these groups are either over or underperforming compared to the overall score. The nice thing I think that we're also going to be doing that we haven't done historically is actually tracking averages for the responses to each of the questions. So SUS is made up of 10 questions that are both positively and negatively oriented. An example of which is, I find GitLab unnecessarily complex, or I would like to use GitLab frequently. What's nice is we can take those each questions and we can look at, okay, well, using the same scale as the SUS score itself, how do the averages scores to those questions track compared to the overall SUS score? And what's nice about that is we can say, okay, maybe the complexity question, the score for that, hypothetically, is 10 points lower than the overall average score. Well, that tells us that maybe we're not doing as well with complexity as we are maybe some other factors, and it gives us some nice direction as to what we need to focus on. So yeah, I think we're in a really good spot now in terms of methodology. We're also going to be calculating a score and doing a collection for self-managed users every other quarter. Unfortunately, we don't have the same contact mechanisms for self-managed users that we have for SaaS users. And so we will still be relying on First Look for that. And because of that, we're only going to do that collection every other quarter. And our sample size will be a little bit lower than the standard sample size for SaaS. Again, this is just due to over-contact concerns and exhausting the population. And so this is nice because it'll also give us another way to compare, SaaS versus self-managed. So yeah, I think we're going to be in a really good place for SUS from now on. If anybody wants any more detail, the handbook page has a good amount of detail on it, and happy to answer any follow-up questions that people may have.
Thanks for that, Jeff. That was a great summary. And I like to explain it in a way where, in layman's terms, we now have a big magnifying glass that we can really look at and zero in on any potential areas that might be lagging or declining, and also increasing, so we can learn what's working there too. So this new methodology really provides us with a lot more data and a lot of different ways to look at some of those findings. So thank you. I see that we don't have any additional questions. So wanted to just make sure that people still have an opportunity to type anything if anything else comes up. And beyond that, if more questions come up, I'm always here to answer anything, or the research channel too in Slack. Given that, we will end early. So thank you very much, everybody. Great questions. And